chat seems we've got people from all over. So that's amazing. And we are also very excited that this is our first sold out workshop. Shall we wait another minute, or what do you think, Rosie and Irene?
Happy to
I think we could
sort of
probably
get
start.
going.
Yeah, sure, perfect. So let me. Okay, wow, so many people in the room. Thank you so much for joining us. We are the Include Plus network team, together with our amazing guest, Irene, who is going to run the workshop today. I'm just going to give you a quick overview of who we are before we get into the more exciting bit, which is the actual workshop around digital equity and collective care, love, and other things. My name is Dr. Alicja Pawluczuk. I work as a research fellow with the Include Plus team, and we have been trying to find meaningful ways to learn from the community about digital equity, but also bring another community of experts, community workers and researchers, and to create a better understanding of what the challenges are and what are some of the methodologies out there that might be inspiring. And that is exactly why Irene is with us today, because her work is extremely important, unique, and we are going to learn a lot throughout the session. No pressure, Irene. And now I'm going to hand over to Rosie, and then Irene, off you go.
Hi, just quickly, it's nice to see everybody. I'm Rosie Wilkinson. I'm the coordinator for Include Plus, so feel free to get in touch if you have any questions after today's workshop. Also, if you have any queries about our current funding call, which is open until the 17th of November.
Great, thanks, Rosie. Okay, my name is Irene Mackintosh. I am with an organisation called Mhor Collective, which I'll talk about a wee bit more in a minute. And I'm joined on the call by my colleague, Shona Monroe, who is the other half of the two folk that set up Mhor Collective sort of 8-9 years ago. We're going to be using a sharing sort of platform, a sort of digital white space called Mentimeter, which I think you would have been invited along to in the setup email. I'm just going to share my screen just now. Shona's posted a link for it in the chat pane, or you can also join. There's a QR code should be sort of appearing in front of you as well at the moment. So you can sort of join that way as well. And this is so that I can sort of have a conversation with you despite us sort of doing it digitally and us asking folk to be on mute while I'm sort of presenting, because I do see a lot of this work as quite conversational. So you can either go to menti.com and put in the code, which is 22755445. That's at the top of the screen, and it'll be at the next slide. It'll be there as well. You can join using the little QR code. But if all of that is feeling too overwhelming, if that sort of approach doesn't work for you, you can use the chat pane, and Shona will keep her eye on that. Or you can take yourself off mute if you need to and sort of join in the conversation that way. I don't want anyone to feel limited by the sort of use of this digital tool. So to check that the digital tool's working, Shona, is it all right? First of all, can you see it?
Yes, I can see it. It's all good.
So let's start with just who's here, what organisation are you from, and what's your favourite app or website? And this will give you a wee second to get used to Mentimeter. So if you can add in your name, your organisation, and your favourite app or website. If you also kind of hate the internet and what it's doing to us, you can also join in with that opinion. If you have no favourite apps or websites, that's absolutely fine. And we'll just check that Mentimeter is working and that I can see your voices. Is anybody joining in the chat, Shona, to say they're having issues with Mentimeter, or does it look okay?
Sorry, I had to get myself off mute. Yeah, we're all good at the moment.
Oh, we've got a TikToker in the room. We've got somebody coming in with Vinted as well. Shona is saying her banking app. And Yashim has no favourite app. I love it. Does that mean, I wonder, Yashim, if you're open to all, or you're just going, I'm not going to be specific here. And Rosie is hunting Include Plus as a website that she loves. Good choice, Rosie. Strong choice. And Mike is coming in with Discogs. I also have a Discogs account, Mike. So I'll need to sort of keep a wee eye out for you there as well. And Alicia's coming back to Instagram, also loves and hates. Giles, no specific app. Alan, welcome along. Various Welsh translation apps. Yep. Really can make a difference. And we're seeing such a massive sort of change as well in the translation apps and on their efficiency, really. They've really come on a lot. And increasingly we're using digital inclusion translation apps to really sort of help us in service delivery. It makes a huge difference. Always with the caveat that a human translator is better. So I'm just waiting to see, is everybody managing to get on? I know that we've got a few more folk in the room, so we've got 14, so I think we're almost there. There's maybe some folk
Someone's just asking for the QR code again. Could you maybe flip back to the QR code?
So I can
possible?
flip back to the QR code. Hold on a wee sec and I'll just go back. There's the QR code there. But you can also just go to menti.com and enter the code as well. So you can either join with the QR or you can just type that in. So I'm just going to jump across. I'm not sure if the QR code is something that we can put in the chat panel. That's a new little thing. Alexa is going for a solar panel app. Okay, so I think we've got almost everybody there. If you're struggling with it, please do not worry. Last thing I want is any sort of digital rage, and just join in on the Zoom chat panel and that'll be fine. So first question I wanted to ask is, what are you hoping that I'm going to talk about today? This is always a kind of moment of truth where I go, well, I'm not talking about that. But I maybe can fit it in, or we can carry on conversations afterwards. So what are you hoping that I'm going to talk about today? There's Sinead coming in. I'll just welcome Sinead into the room. A little bit about Mhor Collective with question marks. We're going to talk a little bit about Mhor Collective, yeah? Anything else? I love it. Folk are just an open book. It feels like, Shona, it's always nice when it's this kind of low bar where people go, I'm just here for the ride. I'm just here to see where this journey takes us. Realistic challenges related to digital equity programs and their impact agendas. I love it. Yes, we kind of are talking about that. Yes, we are. The internet is a tool for social inclusion of different groups. We're talking about that. Participatory methods and ideas. We are going to talk about that. The human side of digital inclusion, not the formula. Not sure. Just saw the event on Include Plus list. Thank you for your honesty. Just saw it. Thought I'd give up an hour of your time. If you are that person, thank you very much for making time for that as well. What's happening around digital inclusion? Methods, Mhor Collective. Okay, Shona, I feel like we can cover a lot of this. So hopefully we'll manage to get into this. So this is sort of what I was thinking I'd talk about today, is digital inclusion and a wee potted history of our work, what digital inclusion can look like on the ground and how it looks for us. We're going to talk a bit about participatory action research, which is the research methodology we usually use and apply in the work that we do, and why we take that approach. And we are going to focus in a little bit on relationships as a beginning and middle and end of digital inclusion work. We see relationships as absolutely integral to the work that we do. So we are going to be talking a little bit about love. So if that feels like it's too much, you may need to sort of, I don't know, cover your ears if that's all feeling a wee bit too much. So what does digital inclusion mean to you guys in the room? So folk that are here, what do you feel digital inclusion means? I always think this is quite an interesting question to start off with, because people have such different and varying insights. I'll just give you a little minute. This is a bit where folk are going, this is too big a question to fit into Mentimeter. This is something I could really get into. It's okay if you just put elements of it down. You don't need to sort of have a scholarly response, just off the cuff. It can just be whatever you feel it means to you today is fine. I think for us, one of the reasons we asked this question as well is we've seen it really evolve. Shona and I have been working in this space for 13 years, working in digital inclusion, 13 or 14, no, 13 years we've been working in digital inclusion. And we've seen the meaning sort of really change over the years. And I think it's always interesting to see as well what it can mean within different societal and political contexts as well. So I think that really impacts as well on the language that we use and what it means. So we've got somebody saying to be able to take part in socio-technical aspects of life, equal chances for everyone to use, considerations around accessibility, I think really, really important, and access for all individuals to devices and tech. So I love that person's also flagging up the stuff. So for us, the stuff is definitely part of it, but is definitely not all of it. Given access to all that we can take for granted and not just a minimum of access. Yes, so it's not just giving people the sort of absolute basics, it's aspiring for more. Brilliant, thank you. Understanding how digital makes us feel, that emotive element, sharing skills, inclusion with consideration of digital, not necessarily through digital. Some really great conversations there, being able to participate in digital changes. That's really helpful. Shona, is there anything you'd like to sort of pull out of that that's particularly meaningful to you just now?
Ah, you're putting me on the spot there. I think
Sorry,
it's all
Emma.
really relevant, and like you've just said, digital digital inclusion can be different for different people. Like people are obviously bringing up the actual hardware, like Wi-Fi and having devices, and how do we make sure people are included that way? But then it's how do we balance that out with the skills? And it's more and more becoming, how do we keep up, I guess, as well? How do we, like I've said to a few folk recently, I feel digitally included right now, but in a decade, am I still going to be digitally included? Or how do I keep myself included and able to access all that's coming our way in a positive manner? So yeah, I think it's a broad spectrum.
A really broad spectrum, and I think what we know from the work that we do is that it isn't always a uniform definition, and we definitely see that sort of interplay between other sort of inequalities and digital inequality and what that looks like. So we're kind of really drawn to the UN definition here, which is equitable, meaningful, and safe access to use, lead and design technical digital technologies, services and opportunities for everybody, everywhere. It's enabled by a human rights-based, intersectional, whole of society policies, multi-stakeholder approaches and actions that take into account various barriers individuals face. So we're saying it's not just digital, it's the wider societal context that people are in. Digital inclusion should aim to dismantle existing societal social inequalities and enhance well-being for all. Which is why quite often when we're asked what we do, we go, well, it's not snappy. We take into account all of these different elements when we go through it. So we see it as a sort of structural social inequality. We see it as something that needs to be torn apart, that doesn't really stand on its own as something we can just tick off. We know it does involve the sort of pillars of digital inclusion. Do people have access to the right devices at the right time to meet their needs? Are the systems being designed appropriately and inclusively? Do they have access to data, and what does that look like? And we work across that spectrum. So at Mhor Collective, we work with organisations where people are impacted by wider inequalities, and we put digital inequality in as part of that work. So what really draws us into a partnership is we tend to work with organisations who share our values, who are led by those who need to access the services and who are open to change, challenge, and disruption. So interestingly, as part of our onboarding, when we're taking new organisations into the body of the Kirk, we ask these questions. Who is leading your organisation? And are you really open to change? And we look for organisations that put relationships at the heart of what they do. Are they offering holistic support? And what does that really mean? What does power look like within those organisations? So we have these very messy conversations right at the start, and we make a commitment then to explore and learn together. We have a kind of an ongoing issue in Scotland. Like, we're one of these sort of really far-reaching organisations. There are very few charities in Scotland we haven't worked with a little bit. Almost nobody knows that we're there together as part of that journey, because we're led by the experts in that space. So we're usually sort of sitting along in the background, exploring how digital inclusion works as part of holistic care. And the work that we do, wherever possible, we try and take a participatory action research approach. What that means is we are trying to place those with lived expertise as leaders in this work and experts in what they know and what they need. We also know that this is the kind of research that's been missing in digital inclusion for a long time. So historically, digital inclusion research was heavily, I guess, heavily quantitative in its approach. There was a lot of frameworks that really looked at sort of ticking boxes and looking at the number of people that we did this to. And that was helpful, I guess, 10 years ago, that starting point, how many people had connectivity or how many people were accessing social media. Actually, what we really want to understand is, how does the digital space impact on people and what can we do about that? The best way of finding that out is by walking alongside people on that journey. So a participatory action research approach often means, for us, starting with no agenda. So we go into our relationships with organisations with no particular plan in mind other than digital inclusion. And we listen and learn from that organisation. We also do the same with those impacted by the services or engaging with the services within those organisations, and try and understand what their challenges are, what they want to do, and where this wants to go. And when we're looking at the data collection on these projects, we look at deeply informed consent and ethical consent. So we do consent and ethics in a way that's meaningful. So as part of this work, I guess I've been working on a PhD for the last 5 years. And one of the things I came in contact with straight away was the ethical consent at the university, and trying to make those ethical consents really meaningful when I was working in really complex situations. So there was the ethics forms that the uni needed. Also, there was the way that we articulated that to the folk who were walking alongside to make sure that we really saw this as an equitable relationship, that we were really trying to make sure everybody understood what we were doing. We also always ask what we collectively want to understand. So we ask that question. And we try and work with funders as well, who are open to exploring a journey rather than just outcome focused. And that can be quite difficult, but that allows us to go into these new settings to ask collectively what we want to understand. We use really creative approaches in gathering that data. Sometimes that can be I suppose a more formal approach, like semi-structured interviews and phone calls and all the rest of it. Sometimes it can be visual data that we gather. It can sometimes be storytelling. But what we're trying to do is gather those insights at every stage of the journey, because for us, the journey is as important as the getting there, if you know what I mean. And then we usually conduct some sort of thematic analysis on all of that. And from that, that's where we really get our stories. That all sounds very kind of, I don't know, when we try and explain it, it never sounds like there's a process or a method to anything that we do. So to try and help us sort of hone in on what we do, I'm going to give some examples of projects that we've done. a few years ago, we worked with an organisation called Neighbourhood Networks. Neighbourhood Networks is an organisation, a third sector organisation based in Glasgow. It works with people who are facing social isolation in all its complexities. So some of those people might have a disability. Some of them might be struggling with a mental health condition. Some of them might just be lonely and not feeling included. Some of them might be leaving jail and want to come back into things. So it's a quite complex demographic of folk. And they are led by their members. The organisation is led by their members, and they focus on facilitating relationships and creating networks of folk to lean on, learn from, and be alongside each other, both socially and however else they present. We had been asked to go along to Neighbourhood Networks and help them explore what digital inclusion might look like for their members. And first and foremost, I kind of went along with quite preconceived ideas almost of how we were going to encourage members to set the agenda. We actually went along with a sort of Scottish, a sort of national Scottish approach in mind that we were going to do. And when I went in, to the room that day, the members were not necessarily focused on the same agenda that I was. And it became very clear that this was my first engagement, maybe, with an organisation that was saying, we don't want to do what you want to do at all. So quite often organisations I'd worked with up until that point had said, yeah, we'll take whatever happens. Like, you just tell us what. This particular organisation was really interesting because they said, no, we don't want to do a programme. We would like to tell you what we want to do and set the agenda here. So the members were very clear that they wanted to look at digital inclusion for their membership. They had ideas about really doing creative and fun, engaging online stuff. They wanted to put gaming as part of that. They wanted to look at social media. They wanted to look at sort of cartoon making. So it was a really broad spectrum of stuff. The organisation, when they'd initially approached me, had talked about things like helping members engage with systems, whether that was health or education or whatever. But the members presented very different ideas. And because the organisation was member-led, then that changed that dynamic. So on the back of the members' ideas and the workshops and all the stuff they came up with, we offered training and support for 64 members and also their parents and carers. So parents and carers came up for two reasons. One, that my academic research at the time had showed that parents and carers, when people have a disability, in particular intellectual disabilities, parents and carers can be very protective over their access to the digital space because they're so worried about the risk. So an additional thing that we did was we offered sessions for parents and carers to explore those risks, talk about what they were concerned about, validate those concerns, and explore how we were going to do our best to try and minimise risk. And we also offered training for the members, and that was everything from, we did offer those sort of cartoon making sessions. We offered training in social media. We created easy read resources. And it was a very sort of mix and match approach to this work. And the members kind of loved it. It was chaos. I've got to be honest and say it was chaos. And we were gathering data as we went through storytelling again and getting people to talk about their experiences and share them with the group and capturing some of that. And then just on the back of that, we had COVID happen. And COVID, for the folk we were walking alongside on this particular journey, meant the same as it did for the rest of us. They were immediately cut off from the physical groups and networks they'd been part of. And there was a real and immediate concern that this was going to compound the social isolation that had made them approach the organisation in the first place. So they were really anxious about that. But what actually happened was that the members then actively led on what the offerings might be online to help people cope with social isolation. And I have never seen an organisation work so hard and so fast to deliver a digital inclusion offering that was really meaningful. So they had kitchen discos, they had online bingo, they had Little WhatsApp groups that were much more closed and very supportive. They had live cook-along sessions. And they coupled those with food parcels. So they had all these immediate responses, but they also already had the buy-in from members and from family members as well to really make that happen. And it was absolutely unbelievable. And now that organisation has continued to grow their digital inclusion offering. They now have a whole sort of digital inclusion team that focuses in on the work they do. I guess they were my first sort of engagement with that sort of approach. I've also been working with Simon Community, and Mhor Collective has been working with Simon Community for 7 years now. Simon Community Scotland is an organisation that supports people experiencing homelessness in Scotland. And 7 or 8 years ago, when we started working with the organisation, it was very much felt by many of the staff working in the organisation that for people experiencing homelessness, digital inclusion was not a priority. That digital stuff, it was very much felt that actually, if we were coming in for that conversation, we really didn't understand the context of people's lives. And so what we did right at the start was I spent a lot of time at the Hub, which was a drop-in space for people experiencing homelessness in Edinburgh, getting to know folk that were using the Hub and asking them both how the internet impacted on their life and whether or not it was important to them, and folk that weren't using the internet, asking them pretty much the same questions. And what we found by people accessing the Hub was a resounding yes, this matters, and yes, we need help. And no, what we don't know what that looks like, because for folk experiencing homelessness, quite often they haven't had the opportunities to get online at all. They maybe haven't got devices, they don't have data necessarily, and they certainly don't have those kind of networks of social support that will help them. So it became imperative that we did that. And we started off with Get Digital Scotland. So Get Digital Scotland is a sort of multi-agency approach. So Get Digital started off and it was really looking at getting people online, but we didn't have devices, we didn't have data at that point. We just started a hub with computers in Simon Community in their sort of drop-in spaces. But it became quickly evident that actually we also needed the devices and the data to do that. And we did that through Get Connected 36, which we had 36 devices with data was our pilot, and then scaled that up to 100 to 500, and that project is continuing to grow. When we went in that work again, we did have agendas at the start of that, which was really focused heavily, when I look back 7 years ago, it was really focused on those numbers, that numbers approach. But what we found is that as we moved through the work, we became increasingly interested in the stories and what was happening to people. They were able to show and evidence how it was part of the holistic care that staff were offering. And this then led into our digital approach with harm reduction. So this is also part of the work of Simon Community, because what we knew is that the folk engaging with Simon Community services quite often were living through addiction. And we knew as well, so even working with staff would quite often say a very similar conversation to we had at the start. Folk who are in active substance use, digital inclusion isn't really for them. So we did see staff at the start of it sort of articulating that, you know, the devices might be sold on, or it just won't work. Actually, what we found is that the women in supported accommodation had said they really did want to be involved in this particular piece of work. Again, we were really lucky to have a funder at that point with no agenda and was happy for us to look at how digital inclusion might sit as part of harm reduction work. So we were able to give devices and data to the women in the project. We created, we didn't create apps for them, we sort of on one-to-one basis as part of their holistic support, we explored those devices and data together and looked at what apps and websites might be really meaningful to them. And at that particular point, we also discovered that in terms of information related to informed drug use for women, there was very little there in the public domain. And so the women also then wanted to create an app that would help other women make informed choices about not only drug use, but just life in general. And on that app, there's also a sort of podcast. All of this was led by trusted individuals. And throughout those 3 case studies almost that I've given, the key element of it all was the relational approach. So all of this work was supported by staff who were walking these journeys with people. These weren't sort of standalone sessions of come along and learn a digital skill. It was always part of holistic care. So the commonalities between all of these examples, and to be honest, as much of the work as we can do, is that we always seek to work with the digital champion model. So our digital skills support, our digital understanding support is part of a holistic journey. And that we're seeing it as one little element. And that allows us to be very nuanced in the work that we do. Commonalities which came latterly, and to be honest, was really kind of kick-started a lot by COVID and a lot of money being put towards devices and data. But we saw that having access to devices and data, unsurprisingly, really made a difference. It made the difference between people being in positions of power and lack of power. So if you think about somebody coming into a busy hub for folk experiencing homelessness and having to engage, for instance, in a court case about their child, that's an example that we had. There is no power, there's only disempowerment in that situation. They're coming into this really busy space and having to do it. So we saw that having access to devices and data really made a huge, huge difference. So we try and sort of embed that in across our work. We saw the really swift development of digital skills and really importantly, digital understanding. So digital skills for us is quite a tick list. So there's an essential digital skills framework that we use in the UK. Actually, what we were seeing is that people were developing contextualized digital understanding. And that just meant a lot more to them, that they could make use of this stuff in a way that was meaningful to them. We saw them engage more with the services. And we were also able, despite the sort of what might seem when you look at it at the start or even as part of the journey, you might see a very messy it might feel like a messy research methodology in comparison with other ones. But actually, once we do the thematic analysis of this, we always come to it and being able to scale up. And the 2 examples that have come from both of these projects are One Connect in Scotland, which is a really it was a national response to digital inequality as a COVID response, getting devices and data to people. And we drew heavily on our learning from neighbourhood networks and beyond for that particular piece. And Digital Lifelines, which as well as a Scottish Government approach for people who are living through addiction. So it's a harm reduction approach as well. So the stuff that we're doing is absolutely scalable. These are also the important messages that we learn, is really understanding what empowerment can look like in the digital space and how that can make a difference. So if I come back to that example of the woman coming into the busy hub to try and engage in a court case about her children, we maybe would never have seen that or really understood what that looked like for that woman had we not been engaging in that one-to-one level. And her having the device, data, and then really meaningful support from someone walking that journey meant she was able to sort of engage in that really difficult conversation herself and in her own home. We also saw the women taking back control in lots of different situations. So in Scotland, we have a treatment, the medically assisted treatment plan is supposed to be open for everyone in Scotland to get the medication they need at a time that they need it. So if you're a person using drugs, you should be able to ask for the medication that you need to keep you safe and well. That quite often doesn't happen. But what we found by supporting the women in using their email address, and in particular, copying them into emails about their own care, changed the power dynamic completely, both with prescribers, with social work, with different agencies that kind of historically had gatekept that information and that power. We saw autonomy and control. We saw people taking control of their decisions, and we can give you lots and lots of stories around this. And time and again, the women, particularly at Simon community, both folk experiencing homelessness and the women working through the project would talk of themes of dignity and respect. They would say things like, I really appreciate this person, they understand what it's like. So it was a two-way relationship. So digital inclusion didn't just look at digital stuff. It opened up so much more in this. And time and again, we would have really concrete examples. So we would hear folks say, it's a lifeline. This service is a lifeline. But time and again, we were given an evidence base to show genuinely how digital inclusion work could save lives. My very first encounter with that was a woman, and this is going back 5 years ago, a woman who talked about a staff member had supported her in using WhatsApp and given her a device. She was rough sleeping in Edinburgh at that particular point, and her life had come undone through a series of sort of stuff going wrong. And the staff member had supported her with WhatsApp, and she was able to build up a relationship with her sister again. She'd kind of fallen away from her sister because her life had sort of spiraled, and her and her sister had become quite estranged. And this like really basic tool, WhatsApp, was able to allow her to bridge that little gap again and build that relationship up until there came a point where her sister said, why don't you just come home? Please just come home. And this woman talked to me in that hub about how if she hadn't had WhatsApp, and if that staff member hadn't seen that that was the need that was missing and helped her with that relationship, she would have made a completely different choice about her life. Her decision at that point was that there was nothing worth living for. And weirdly, it was WhatsApp, which was the thing worth living for. We had another example of women in Simon community using a YouTube video on how to administer naloxone when one of the women in the service had been experiencing an overdose, and her friends had had the wherewithal to find a YouTube video about administering naloxone to save this woman's life. No staff member had directed them to that. I think that's really important. We also had another person join a recovery meeting in the middle of the night, because if you're on a recovery journey, then it doesn't always fit within working hours. So we saw all of these things over at Neighbourhood Networks. Again, we heard about people who were so lonely that they felt they didn't have, that there was no point to any of it. And they, again, would talk about this lifeline. It came up again and again, but really importantly, we sort of were creating an evidence base as we went through it, exploring really what this meant to people. And for us, it always comes down to this. All of the work that we do is rooted in these relationships and love. So we are asking frontline staff, parents, carers, whoever, to come into digital inclusion work and build these meaningful, non-judgmental relationships with love, respect, and connection flowing both ways. And that can be challenging because we quite often in the work that we do also have to talk about boundaries and what that can look like. But what these relationships really mean, do I care about what is going on for this person? Can I go into this with no agenda? Increasingly, we are embedding the values of trauma-informed practice in the work that we do because we know that that matters. And we know that harm reduction, regardless of the context that you're working, you might look at your own space and go, I don't need to think about harm reduction. But really reflecting on how both trauma-informed practice and harm reduction values can impact on digital inclusion work has been really important to us. So we talk a lot about the doing of digital inclusion with love. It isn't a passive activity. It isn't a skills-based tick list. It is this idea of walking on a journey with somebody and sharing a sort of loving relationship without judgment. And that is what really makes the difference. I found it really interesting because I kind of came to the end of a PhD journey really recently, and I had been sort of really focused in on Paulo Freire at the start of my participatory action research approach. And it was interesting for me as I was coming to the end of all of that years of work and thinking, really, how do I sort of embed this, might feel like a bit of a hippie message, into the work that we're doing and the PhD that I'm finishing off? How can our organisation really reflect on love as part of what we do? And it was this quote that really pulled it all together for me. It's that idea that what we are trying to do in the work that we are doing is making a commitment to others. That might be the staff members that we're working alongside. It might be the folk engaging with the organisation. It might be you guys in the room today, even. It's a commitment to go in, how can we do this together? Because wherever there is this inequality, wherever folk are being oppressed by systems, it is that sort of commitment to walking alongside that journey and a commitment to love that is going to change that picture. Now, amazingly, Shona will be blown away by the fact that you have managed to leave 10 full minutes for questions just now. So I'm going to, because that is rattling through projects which have taken us years to do. We've put links in the chat, hopefully, and we also have the actual reports and things like that we can share with